Right, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to the State of the Market. And I have to say I've been doing this for quite a long time. I've been in business for about 30 years. And I don't think I've ever known a time with quite so much political and possibly economic uncertainty. And I think for me the biggest surprise is actually how remarkably stable the property market has been, bar a few hiccups in things like the prime market. When this level of uncertainty kicks in, normally this would affect the property market quite dramatically, and it hasn't anywhere near as much as I would expect. Two reasons for that, I think, where we do have some stability is people still need to put a roof over their head and still believe it's a good investment. And secondly, the interesting thing is, of course, we've had reasonable stability on the financial side, and particularly the low cost of entry into housing. So that's kind of my thoughts. But far more important than me, I have my esteemed panel here. I believe that's what you're supposed to call them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each one, and then I'm going to go back to them. And rather than do some rambling presentation for 5 minutes, which is what everybody did last year, including me, I've just asked them to suggest 3 things about the market, the state of the market, that you might find useful to know. And then really what we want to do is hand over to you. So start thinking of questions. Otherwise, I will pluck you from the audience to ask something. Because a panel is rubbish if you all come here and just sit and listen. Okay? So on my far left, we've got Tony Gimple. He's from Less Tax for Landlords. One of the things I did do, because I thought it would be a fun Friday, is I put everybody's names into Google just to see what comes up. And actually, the only thing that comes up is Tony. There is no other Tony Gimple in the whole wide world as far as Google is concerned. So, and Tony's very much our tax expert here, which is if you are not into tax at this moment in time, you'd better get into it now as far as I'm concerned. Next to Tony, we have David Smith. David is a joy to put into Google because apparently he has every single profession that's around, but the 2 top ones that came up were a structural engineer. I could see you doing that. And also a sculptor. No, solicitor, sculptor, I'm not sure those 2 would work. But an English cricketer was the other one. Is that one? You've got quite the poise for an English cricketer.
Well, I mean, solicitors and cricket, there's a long-standing...
There we go. There we go. So other possible careers for our panellists. And he is Policy Director for the Residential Landlord Association and partner for Anthony Gold Solicitors. And I tell you what, I've known Dave for a long time, and I would actually describe him as a legal legend, and I genuinely mean that. So we are, stop laughing. That is not maybe on Google, but it should be, and we are very, very lucky to have him here today. And if you don't, one of the things you must keep up to date with is the legals, as well as the tax side of things, and David's blogs are absolutely brilliant because I understand them. And when that comes to legals, that is not always easy to do. Next to me on my right, I have David Cox. I feel like it should be Sir David Cox, no?
I won't turn it down.
So David is apparently either, according to Google, he is either an artist or a footballer. And I have to say, I cannot imagine you in either of those circumstances.
Well, I've got 2 left feet, and I'm about as creative as... I don't think I could do either of those
He's so
jobs.
creative, you can't even answer, you can't even follow that through, can you? So, however...
My painting skills are second to none.
However, there we go, they're not. Have you ever painted?
You see me draw things on boards.
So, more importantly for us today, David is the Chief Executive of ARLA. And there's so many acronyms, but basically letting agents, so he looks after the letting agents. In the past, I think both my Davids have been barristers. Is that right?
I've always been a solicitor.
Oh, right, there we go.
I trained as barrister.
You've got to question what you put on Google these days, really.
People write anything on.
But what I do also know is that David works incredibly hard. So there are some people that go out and they kind of do their day job. He doesn't, because David is one of I call him my night buddies. He doesn't know this, by the way. He's getting very, very nervous at the moment. But basically, if you send emails out at 11 o'clock at night, of which I do a lot, basically David is one of the ones that always responds immediately. So this is very much not a day job, and he does a massive amounts for letting agents, landlords, and indeed tenants. So again, when we do a thank you at the end, these guys are working very hard on your behalf, not just with their day job, but what they do outside. And last but absolutely by no means least, we have the lovely Richard Blanco. Now, you come up as a poet, but when I read on, that is not far off, because in actual fact, Richard was in theatre. Do you still do it now? Theatre and a dancer.
Yes, I trained as a contemporary dancer, actually, yep. That's right.
Get up and do it.
I haven't choreographed anything for today, I'm afraid.
I thought it was unlikely, I thought I'd ask anyway.
Yes.
About that. But again, Richard, he's a London landlord now, probably because theatre and dance didn't pay brilliantly. I don't know.
Rather do telly.
That's fair enough. So he's a London landlord, so he's a really experienced landlord, really gets this localised market. And he's the London landlord representative for the NLA.
Yes.
Yes, so we have everybody covered here today. So we are very lucky to have everybody here. So Tony, should we start with you? Your three bullet pointed, Tony, things that you think everybody needs to know about the state of the market from a tax perspective.
Right, so...
Speak up.
I shall speak up, I shall project.
Project, please.
Richard, lessons from RADA, please. Right, so, if any of you were at my talk, you'd have probably actually heard me, so I'm going to repetition for emphasis. If you haven't realised, some 60% of landlords will have higher tax bills as a result of sitting on their hands. In fact, that their bills will go up significantly, and that will start to come back and bite you very, very quickly. Second bullet point, and this is the most disturbing part, is 6 out of 10. So actually, no, it's more than that. Sorry, it's 1 in 8 landlords fail to consult a tax specialist, and 2 out of 10 are trying to do it themselves. Now that, once again, will grow teeth and come back and bite you at some point. Property tax is difficult. It's not like running a corner shop. The third point, and probably even more important than the previous two combined, is traditional professions, particularly accounting, will simply assume you know what you're doing and only answer the question you've asked. Now that is dangerous, because they're effectively now acting under your instruction and won't check what you know in the first place. So if it all goes wrong, what will they say? You asked the question, I answered it.
And I think the main point is that you can help people mitigate tax before.
Yes.
What you can't do, if we have a new budget and something happens, that's it. You've lost your opportunity.
Yeah.
So it is really, really important to make sure. I always say at Property Investor Show, please keep up with the legals. And secondly, do not try and do tax yourself, certainly from the start. Thank you, Tony.
Pleasure.
David.
3 legal points, I assume. 3 things that people
State of the market, you can legalise them if you wish.
Okay, I'll stick 3 legal things.
Freelance.
The first thing I would say is that people are very excited about the government getting rid of Section 21, unsurprisingly. But there's a long way between a government announcement and a consultation and actually passing a piece of legislation through Parliament that's got kind of other stuff to do to get rid of Section 21. And the prospects of that being on the statute book before early to mid 2022 are practically zero. And the prospects of it being on the statute book at all are not that high. Particularly having been to the Conservative Party conference this week and spoken to people who don't rate it that high. So I've heard a lot of landlords go around saying, I'm going to serve Section 21 right now, and I'm seeing on Twitter landlords already serving Section 21s before it goes away. That would be really premature. So if you're thinking of leaving the market, then fair enough, but just don't assume that just because the government says it's going to consult on something, it's going to actually happen tomorrow. Well, it certainly won't happen tomorrow. The second thing is I will talk about licensing. I think one of the things that is changing at the moment is as the government's made changes to various room size rules and things, that there's a continued push towards more and more selective licensing and quite targeted selective licensing schemes. I see far too many people falling foul of those. You really must be aware of what your local authority are doing. Almost every local authority has a landlord information forum. You really should sign up. It's the best opportunity you will ever have to go and drink cheap wine with local authority officers. But more to the point, they will then put you on their lists, and we'll make sure you're actually being updated with what they're doing. You'll get early access to consultations. And the third thing is I'm seeing really too many scams at the moment. I see far too many cases of very, very dubious letting agents, not ARLA members, I hasten to add. And
or rigs.
Or members of any professional body, fairly obviously. And far too many very dubious rent-to-rent schemes. So if someone's saying to you, I'm going to charge you an amount that's way less than the market, or I'm going to pay you a full market rate and guarantee you no void periods, it's too good to be true. If it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. So there are perfectly valid cheap letting agents, there are perfectly valid rent-to-rent schemes and rent-to-rent providers, but they are not all valid, and the level of protection to landlords, if those things go south, is very low. So it's really important to just think carefully about the kind of schemes you're getting involved in and what you're investing your money in.
Okay, that's great. David?
Firstly, I'm going to echo everything that David has just said. I agree with him in relation to absolutely everything.
Must be.
Absolutely. And I'm going to continue the theme of crappy letting agents. So, as the agent representative on the panel, there are too many poor letting agents. How many here actually use or have at any point used a letting agent? The majority of you. Exactly. Some are great. ARLA members are great. Some are terrible. And when they are managing what is probably your largest asset after the home in which you live, for a tenant it's their home, should it not be your right and your tenant's right that they have somebody who knows what they're doing? And at the moment, you can open your doors at 9 o'clock in the morning, and as long as you've joined a redress scheme, you are perfectly lawfully allowed to continue to operate as a letting agent with no knowledge, no skills, no training whatsoever. It's why we've been campaigning for a long time, and therefore number one is the government has now committed to regulating property agents, estate agents, letting agents and auctioneers. All ARLA members have to have a qualification at a level 3, which is akin to an A level. We are expecting shortly the government to announce that all letting agents will have to have a level 3 qualification and a licence to practice from an independent regulator. Now, just as with the Section 21 changes that David was talking about, it's not going to come in overnight. I'm not actually expecting it to come in until the middle of the next decade. But it's something that Kate, you and I have worked on. Everybody here has worked very hard to make sure that you as landlords and your tenants are not being caught by unscrupulous letting agents. Whilst I'm on that particular topic, there's not much you can do about ROPA, the regulation of property agents now, unless you use an ARLA or RICS member or one of the other professional bodies. But what all letting agents have had to do since the 1st of April this year is join a client money protection scheme. Now, it's a great way of landlords being able to tell whether their agent, one, knows what they're doing, and two, are complying with the law. So, there are 6 government-approved client money protection schemes. All letting agents have to be a member of one. What they do is if the agent goes bust or runs off with your money, the schemes give you your money back. They are protection almost exclusively designed for landlords. It also covers tenants who haven't had their deposits protected or holding deposits, etc. But it is about you getting your money back if your agent runs off with it. If your agent is not displaying their client money protection certificate prominently in their office and on their website, they are legally required to join a scheme. Therefore, if they're not doing that, what other laws are they not complying with? So use that as a barometer of whether or not your agent is a good agent, is a competent agent. And if they haven't got CMP, don't touch them with a barge pole, because you could lose thousands and thousands of pounds in rent if they run off with it. ARLA has had 12 situations like that in the last 35 years where one of our members have done it. We've returned the money in every occasion, but the last major situation, they closed the office on the Thursday night. One business partner opened the office on the Friday morning to find that his colleague had taken £900,000 out of the client account, out of the business account, and moved to Northern Cyprus overnight. If those had not been ARLA members, all those landlords would have lost that money. So make sure that your letting agent does have CMP and make sure they are displaying it. And if they're not, don't use them. Final point, Tenant Fees Act. The Tenant Fees Act has come in. It's not just applicable to letting agents, it is applicable to landlords. and do consider some of the sort of the slightly more technical aspects. And the one that I'm going to pick up on is contents insurance. If you mandate contents insurance, that is a prohibited payment. If you say you should have contents insurance, I would recommend you go to this contents insurance provider, that's fine. But if you mandate contents insurance, that will be classed as a prohibited payment under the Act, and you will be liable to the £5,000 fine.
Okay. And one thing I would say on the CMP side, if you think the average tenancy now is about 4 years, so it is, I hope it comes in a lot quicker, the ROPA regulation, than
yes.
David does, and I should be pushing very hard for that. But why on earth would you go with an agent that isn't already self-qualified if your tenancy is going to run for 4 years, and if in 2-3 years' time that agent is not going to be in business because they're going to be breaking the law? It's a really nuts scenario, but we are very reliant on you to make sure that you only work with the good agents. And ARLA, RICS, other organisations have worked very, very hard to show you a badge to deliver you good letting agents. So I'm going to be a little harder than David and say, if you go with a rogue letting agent, do you know what? It is your fault, because there's been an awful lot of work done to make sure that there are good agents out there from organisations like this. So there's kind of no excuses. A bit like cowboy builders, that's another little thing about mine. You can find a good builder these days. So do check. There are no excuses for going with rogue letting agents at all. Richard, what nuggets have you got for us?
To follow on from that, I mean, our research at the NLA tells us that 43% of landlords in our survey are regular users of letting agents. But of course, a lot of landlords these days will manage their own properties, as I do. And our research also tells us that 32% of landlords say that letting agents have put up their fees recently because of the tenant fees ban. So I think I'm really interested to see what's going to happen in the next few years in terms of the letting agent market. We have seen some consolidation with larger agents taking over smaller agents, and whether there'll be more migration towards online kind of £99 to get advertised on Rightmove and that sort of thing. I think that's going to be very interesting. My second point was just following on the Section 21 abolition issue. I think as much as David does, that it slips down the agenda, and that Boris being a bit more free market than Theresa May, and certainly now we've got rid of Toby Lloyd as the special advisor, who was the former head of policy at Shelter, that this will sort of fall by the wayside. My concern is that Shelter and all of the housing charities are desperate for Section 21 to be abolished. It's Labour Party policy, so I feel like the writing might be on the wall. I really hope it isn't, and I hope this goes away as an issue. We've done some research with Capital Economics to help us lobby against it, and we were at the Tory party conference, and the modelling that they've done for us, they think that the private rented sector could shrink by 20% if Section 21 is abolished. And also there'll be a 59% reduction in the amount of properties available for tenants on benefits, because of course landlords will become increasingly choosy, and that rents could go up as well. We think in 13% of homes in the PRS sector rents could go up. So my third point was on the market and what's happening to the market. I'm very interested in how we've had better yields and more growth in the Midlands and the North recently, and we've had prices gently drifting down in London and the East and the South East, and we're starting to see that growth sort of slow now in the Midlands and the North, and so at some point I think we'll see a switch round of that cycle, which is what generally happens. But of course it's very hard to know because of Brexit, and because if we have a no-deal Brexit, if we have a deal, or if we don't Brexit, there will probably be three different outcomes on the market. I think a no-deal Brexit would cause the market to slip further. A deal would probably cause it to carry on more or less as it is at the moment, sort of chuntering along, probably slipping down a bit. And if Brexit is abolished, then I think the market could rebound a bit. There's global recession, of course, is a potential too, so that could impact on things. So lots of uncertainty there, as we know, lots of political uncertainty. I think I stick my neck out recently and have said that I think possibly interest rates could come down by 0.25%, and I had a dilemma of whether to go with a tracker or a fix recently. And so I've gone with a tracker which is slightly cheaper than the fix. I noticed some of the lenders are making trackers a bit more expensive than fixes now, which is again is another hint that they might be worrying that interest rates are going to come down, and so they need to adjust their products accordingly. But the Bank of England has certainly suggested that the rate coming down is more likely than it was, more in recent months. So I think that be interesting to see the impact that could have on the market, of course.
Right, well that's everybody else's view. Have we got any views from the audience or questions? And bear in mind, seeing as you're coming back to us, you'll need to shout, because I am slightly deaf. Yes?
Hi, I did have somebody approach me to rent an apartment that I have on this rent-to-rent thing. I found it very odd question in the first place, and I sent back a question with the letting agent, who I do think are very good, but I was surprised that they put this to me.
So basically, so you had somebody approach you via the agent to do rent to rent.
Yeah, and they've been fine on other tenants before. But this time, all I said was, well, I really need to check my mortgage, my buy-to-let mortgage, and whether it would be covered. And then I never heard anything back from them. I sent a message back saying, well, could you ask her more detail exactly what she would do with my property? How is she going to fill the property and pay my rents? And it was guaranteed, like you just said. And when I sent that question back through the agent, she was out of the country.
Was it tempting to do it, or were you just intrigued to find a little more?
No, I had my guard up really.
Yeah, good for you.
Definitely had my
good
guard
for you.
up. I wanted a tenant in long term that I didn't have to worry about.
I would say several things about rent to rent. There are definitely good quality rent to rent deals out there. So I don't want to tar the whole rent to rent market with a brush by any means. There are some very good people doing very, very reasonable and fair things, but there are things to watch out for. There are agents who are receiving a commission from the tenants, so they are effectively carrying out a secret commission, and they're basically working both sides. That's not really lawful, but some agents are definitely doing that.
Because then, so with the fees that they have to, does it come under the?
No, because
because
it's a company,
okay.
and the let's not an AST. It's exempt.
So normally agents now have to say if they're getting a fee. So if you're buying a house through them and they ask you to use their legal company, they have to declare what commission they get.
Sure.
And what David's saying is you can't do that.
Not all agents are doing that. So they're getting a fee effectively from the tenant as well as taking a fee from you. So there is that risk. I'm not saying your agent's doing that or any particular agent's doing that, but I've certainly seen examples. The other difficulty is you've got to bear in mind how rent-to-renters make money. I mean, essentially, they are proposing to pay you less money than they can make for the property. Now, that either means they pay you less than the market rent, or they engage in what I tend to call rent arbitrage, i.e. they rent your single flat and chop it up in some way that's going to make more money. Now, that might be by renting it as a series of roomlets as an HMO, or by short-letting it on Airbnb as a set of holiday lets. Now, that in itself creates problems. Almost, not every, but the majority of buy-to-let mortgages prohibit HMO use. Most people think that means licensed HMO use, but that's not what they say. They just say no HMOs. So letting it to 3 people sharing is going to violate the terms of your mortgage. Now, you can get mortgages that allow HMOs, but they're specific. Every mortgage prohibits short letting, either implicitly, directly, or because they prohibit something else that's going to catch you out. If it's a flat, literally every flat lease I've ever seen prohibits short letting because they say no business use, and short letting is a business use. And of course, if you're in London, it's planning breach anyway, which is prohibited both by your flat lease and by your mortgage and by your insurer. So the thing I'm always very, very immediately...
Apart from that, it's fine.
Apart from that, yeah. So the first question to ask for a rent-to-rent deal is how are you making your money? Now, it might be they're just paying you a bit less than the market rent and you're getting a no void periods for the next 3.5 years, and fair enough. It might well be that they're going to use it as an HMO and you're okay with that. It might be that they're going to short let it and where you are is fine, but they have to be honest about it. And then the last thing I would say is look carefully at the contract. A lot of rent-to-rent deals have their own contracts, which is fine, but some of them say they're ASTs when they're not, because they're being presented by crazy people. Some of them have very creative clauses, like, for example, if they don't pay you the rent, you can't evict them. Certainly seen that a fair few times. So the forfeiture clauses are just scrubbed out. If you don't have it, you can't use it. I've seen a fair few where you think the tenancy is going to end after 3 years, but it just doesn't, provided they've got someone in the property they can keep going forever, which may be a surprise to you. And of course, none of these are protected by consumer protection rights because you're not a consumer. You're letting them the property. They're a business, so there's no consumer protection stuff here. You can't do unfair terms or any of that stuff. So there's some real questions to be asked about the contract. And the last thing I would say is check out the business. So many of these people are limited companies that were set up yesterday. If I wanted to rent, if I rent an office from a large office provider, I have a limited company that was set up yesterday, they're not going to rent it to me. And if they do, they'll say, we want a personal guarantee from you. I mean, I have this issue. I'm a lawyer. I rent offices. We give personal guarantees all the time for our office premises. But a lot of these rent-to-rent guys are setting up limited companies that were set up yesterday that have no trading history, no filed accounts, and are apparently going to pay you.
I think the bigger issue here, Kate, is that people are chasing bigger yields, and it's
Yes.
partly driven by the PRA changes with stress tests on mortgages, so people are having to show more rent to be able to borrow what they need for that particular property. People are also, because of the low yields in London and the South East, they're starting to look at HMOs, they're starting to look up north. You know, there was a report out this week which said that an increasing number of properties are being let where the living room is a bedroom now. And that's of course becoming much more common in London. You know, I really stick to my guns with my 3 and 4 bed houses. I keep the living room. I want it to be a nice property. I'm happy to take less rent. I'd rather have really nice tenants that look after the property. And because I've bought well and bought in a place where I've got capital growth and so on, that my business is fine, and I don't need to max everything out. And I think that's a really important value that I'd like to share with you.
David, any thoughts on the letting agent side and rent to rent? Are you coming across that much?
It is something, we're coming across it actually more as a problem rather than a solution. There are, and I would say there are, a few very good rent-to-rent letting agents that actually specialise in the rent-to-rent market.
And they'll be ARLA members.
Yeah, and I can think of at least half a dozen that are ARLA members and operate to high professional standards. So let's not tarnish all of them with the same brush. Having said that, we are increasingly seeing properties, exactly what David has just been talking about, that are rented as if they were one person. The letting agent goes round to do the regular inspection to find that there are 6 people living in it. It is very difficult then to get them out, because even though they are not your tenant, they are permitted occupiers under the property, under the law. Therefore, you have to go through the standard eviction proceedings. You can't just change the lock. So one of the things we have noticed, if it looks too good to be true, it is. If somebody is turning up in a very smart suit and a smart car in an
like
area, yeah, absolutely. In an area that you would not expect them to want to rent in, shall we say, and they're offering you 6 months rent up front, that should be a massive flag of why do they want the property. Because it could be rent to rent. We're also seeing, we're really confusing people today, but we're also seeing a lot of cannabis factories, meth labs, and other illegal situations, shall we say. It's something we've actually been doing quite a lot of work with the Home Office recently on county lines, and whilst it used to be London where they turned properties into the cannabis factories, they're now creating entire supply chains, shall we say, and it's actually outside of London in more rural areas. So if you've got properties in rural areas where people are offering you rent up front and those sort of situations, be very, very careful, because they may be turning your property into a drug den and then using children to traffic the drugs from Reading and the home counties particularly into London. And it is a major issue, and I'm sure you hear on a regular basis on the news about the Met's County Lines initiative.
So on that happy note, have we another question? Yes, please.
Actually related to this.
Okay.
You mentioned rent to rent, that there are some good businesses out there. What should a startup plan rent to rent business do to be compliant with everything it needs to be compliant, and how should it run? How should it set the business up in terms of compliance with the various rules and regulations?
So just to repeat, so everybody hears. So we've talked about you being the landlord, being offered rent to rent, and what this lady's asking is, well, if I want to set up a rent to rent business, what do I have to do to be one of the good guys?
So yeah, I get a lot of clients who want to set up rent-to-rent businesses or want to improve the quality of their business, things I will say is have a business plan.
Yeah.
Far too many rent-to-rent businesses don't have very good business plans and they fold because they haven't anticipated all the costs. You need to have a good quality agreement, both upstream with whoever's supplying the property and downstream with the people who are occupying the property, which clearly sets out who's doing what.
Is that a management agreement? It's not an
Well, no,
LSD?
it's a tenancy agreement.
It's
I mean,
tenancy
this is
agreement.
the other thing. Be very clear about what you're doing. A lot of rent-to-rent businesses are saying that they're a letting agent and it's a management agreement. It's not. You're a tenant of somebody else and a landlord. So you're in the middle. You're a middleman. And then the other thing is you've got to get your licensing position squared away. Far too many rent-to-rent businesses just don't get licenses. In some cases, don't even know they need licenses, and that just causes just chaos all down the road.
Licenses from the council?
Yeah, local authority licensing schemes.
And Tony, tax implications quickly on rent to rent, because I do want to move on to other topics.
Effectively, it's a trading business.
Okay.
Yeah? But the point here, it's a business. Why are you doing it in the first place? Have you got a plan? Who have you talked to? Have you referenced? Are the agreements enforceable? Treat it like any other business, and then you'll be on much firmer footing than just wet finger in the air. Oh, rent to rent, I can make some money.
Yeah, there are far too many people on the internet with this sort of
Yeah.
make money out of property, no money down, you'll make $1 million. They've all got, if you notice, they all have pictures of themselves leaning against a posh car. Always.
Do you know what?
Which they usually don't own.
Yes, that was one thing I was going to
Yeah.
say. There was a thing a few years ago, because basically we've all been here for quite a long time. So what we know is that every sort of 3 or 4 years, somebody invents a new way to come out to make money out of property. Some do it well, some don't do it well. And there was a rumour that some guys used to go around and they'd have their picture in the car and everything leaning on them, but they just rented them for the night. That was it. But it suckered people in, sadly.
When you said licensing, do you mean HMO licenses?
Well, I mean HMO or
Yeah.
selective licensing from the
Yeah.
respective local authority and or planning consent for what you're planning to do with property.
We have a disagreement to my right.
Can I slightly disagree with David,
About-
but
about
also
boss cars or-
simultaneously... Not going to live that down, am I?
No.
Ask David what he drives.
So David made the point that you are a tenant as a right to rent. You're absolutely right. But you are effectively acting, though, as an agent. And you will rent to rent will be covered under ROPA. You will be classed as a letting agent under ROPA. And technically, under the client money protection regulations, they will be classed as an agent.
No,
as
I
well.
don't think they are covered by client money protection because they're not holding client money. They're not clients. I don't agree with
I'm not
that.
sure
There.
whether I
Okay,
agree
we'll
with
disagree
you.
about this later.
We're tennising this one.
In any event, you know, one of the key things you do want to do is make sure that you know how to manage property or the laws that are required to comply with around managing property, because it's not a simple task. There are 165 different pieces of legislation and 400 sets of regulations. Did the ARLA come out with recently?
The number changes every week.
Well, indeed.
Depends if you add
indeed.
Wales or not.
But there's a huge amount of law that you need to know in order to lawfully and effectively manage property. So yes, David is absolutely right. You are technically the tenant under the law, but in what you are doing, you are effectively managing a property on behalf of
So should
the
it be
landlord.
tenancy
Well,
or
I
management?
think
You need to be clear. I mean, it's up to
hold
you.
on. What you need to do is get proper legal advice from experts and proper advice from the likes of ARLA, because this is not something,
Nicole.
it's a bit like tax, and hopefully Tony you're with me here. I always get asked, what tax will I have to pay, Kate? I refuse to answer it. It's not that I don't know the answer, it's just that if I gave you an answer today and 3 months down the line things have changed, you have no idea. So the answer is, if you're setting up a rent-to-rent business, you must get expert legal advice and expert tax advice because it's a business. And I think that's where a lot of people get away and do a lot of things wrong in property because they're trying to do it without that expert help. And that's where I see people fall down. So we're going to leave that one there. Next question. Yes, sir?
Yeah, just to make sure it's me. It's like the gentleman was talking earlier about letting agencies and you know how good they are and knowledge they have. And I think was talking about like section. They should be at least level 3. How much exposure is it for a person who generally uses letting agents to manage their property? If something goes wrong, they haven't checked them. how much exposure is it to the person who actually owns the property?
Oh, that's a good question. So I like this. So this is about if I let a letting agent manage a
Yes.
property.
Yep.
Basically, what you're saying is how much responsibility do they take, and how much responsibility am I left with? Is that right?
That's also one of the most
Dave and I are
difficult.
going to disagree. For
Yeah,
sure.
that's one of the most difficult questions.
Can't have
Because
two Davids and then one of you
technically-
disagrees with the other. That's really complicated to write
technically,
up.
landlords are responsible. So if you are prosecuted, it is the landlord that will be prosecuted 9 times out of 10, not the letting agent. There are, I accept, certain situations,
We'll
licensing,
go
for
over to
example.
David for his views.
But generally, legislation writes the landlord will, the landlord won't. The landlord will be liable if you do or you don't do what you're allowed to or not allowed to do. Therefore, as the primary responsibility, legal compliance sits with the landlord. Now, the letting agent, so say a letting agent doesn't do something and you as the landlord gets prosecuted. Now, I would say, firstly, you will have a right of redress to their redress scheme for compensation. You will also have a business contract where, although you will be liable, you should be able to then sue them for your losses. But that is a lot of work and you may lose. And it is why we are saying that letting agents need to know what they are doing so that they don't forget to do a right to rent check, for example. That's you get a £3,000 fine if your letting agent hasn't done that for every tenant that they haven't done it on. You've got, if they haven't served the how to rent guide, you have problems with section 21, regaining possession of the property. If they haven't done the gas safety certificate when they've said they would. All of those you are liable for, but they have contracted and charged you for doing the work.
And Richard, so if I'm a member of the ARLA or the NLA, then will your legal helpline help with stuff like this?
Yes.
Just seeing what other protection there is, because you're right, it's a costly thing if you've got to do yourself.
They will.
but-
I mean, I would make the case, I was going to say to Kate, for not using agents. Because I think one of the problems, and let's have some disagreement on the panel, otherwise it's a bit dull, isn't it? But that's
You can have constructive disagreements, no fights. That's what I said the other day.
the thing. Obviously, an agent will take, if they're managing in London, it will be something like 12%, maybe 15% of your rent. Also, I think when you use an agent, sometimes you de-skill yourself because you don't bother finding out what the regulations are and what's going on, because you just assume the agent's going to be able to do it for you. Now, if you want to join the NLA or the RLA and use the advice line, you get a regular journal as well that keeps you up to date with everything. And certainly, if your properties are nearby, then I think there's no reason why you shouldn't try and manage them yourself and
But
use.
even as somebody that's starting out that doesn't know the 400 rules and regulations, 160 laws, I mean,
See,
that is
honestly,
that is a massive
No,
task.
I would say yes.
This
Kate,
is where I
yeah.
agree with Kate on this one.
Right.
At least do it for the first time so that you use a
No,
reputable
I don't agree.
agent.
What I would
learn
say
what
is
you need to
no,
learn.
no, no,
and
no,
But
then
no.
go
most,
on.
but that's where the accidental landlords.
No,
come
I
proper,
think you
isn't it?
do the Landlords Foundation course at the NLA, which is a one-day course which gives you a very thorough understanding.
He's turned it into a sales pitch.
You can also do.
Did you hear that?
How much does that cost, Richard?
I don't know. Actually. You go to landlord meetings, you meet other people, etc. Yeah, I really think skill
Right,
up, skill
middle
up
of the
yourself.
road, over to
I
David.
would take a more medium position between both these positions. Actually, Dave and I are not going to disagree. The first point to bear in mind is landlords are 100% liable for the actions of their agent. At common law, they always have been, and they always will be.
Yeah.
Basically, the government has introduced sets of legislation over the years that fix agents more directly with liability. But the traditional common law position was agents could turn around and say, I'm just the agent, go see the landlord, it's not my problem. Which was like the cool thing about being an agent in a legal sense. That's been cut down, but it's still the case that landlords are basically 100% liable for the actions of their agents. They may also have redress against their agent, but if their agent's a limited company and is currently residing in northern Cyprus, that's not going to get you very far. And the reality is when agents go down, they go down and there's almost nothing there. So
Fast, don't they?
and they go fast,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
because
also remember, Kate, that the most valuable asset in my business is my relationship with my tenants.
Yeah.
Because I do a check-in with them, because I do an induction meeting with them, I build up a relationship with them that means they're much less likely to go into arrears, much less likely to trash the property, more likely to stay 5 or 6 years, which means I won't get voids and I won't have to find new tenants.
So
But if you're
I would tend to
abroad,
say
though,
there's
you
nothing
can't
wrong
do
with
that.
Yeah.
using an agent, but I always say trust and check.
Yeah.
So
And you said-
absolving all of your responsibility to the agent is a mistake.
That's what the gentleman said on his side.
Just say David, because you got 50-50 chance.
Richard.
Oh, there we go.
Richard said, I agree 150% what he said. Visit there, it's just on the road. But if you're one of these distance one or even people abroad,
Yeah.
it's difficult to do that.
Of course.
So you want to do your due diligence as much as you can. I think the panel, what you're trying to say, what you're trying to say at that point, is you're not totally liable and you're not using your due diligence. Enough is basically find as much information that you need to know yourself. Like it seems like what I'm having to do is keep chirping and following up the agency to making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Then you've got the wrong agent.
Story. It's a common
They-
story.
Because it sounds to me what you're saying is they've got a lot of get out.
Well, I would always check up on an agent, but yeah, if you're finding you're checking up on them and they're no good,
It's the wrong agent.
It's the wrong agent.
It's the wrong
And
agent.
certainly in the early days.
If they're good, I would still use the fact that you have a right to access your documents that they are holding on your behalf
Yes.
to see the tenancy agreements and to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Look, the key thing here, and this is why the whole property sector has managed to get itself into trouble and be treated as having an accident. It is a business. It is no different from any other business or profession out there. At the end of the day, you're the managing director, you're the owner, and whilst you, yes, are entitled to rely upon other people's expertise, you need to educate yourself, you need to have checks and balances, you need to find out what the contracts, your redress procedures are, and you need to make sure everybody involved understands you're running a business and that you offer the best possible service and tenancies that you can. You can't say, I was just passive in this, I thought I'd make some bucks, I didn't check up on who the agent was, and they don't service the boiler, and you get done for manslaughter. No.
Ignorance is not bliss in this case.
Correct.
Right, next question. Do you want to put your hands up? Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, we did talk a lot about rogue landlord and all that. Is there someone trying to help us to get rogue tenants as well?
Okay, all lovely questions. So all the talk is about you horrible, naughty, rogue landlords, and this lady's quite rightly asking, well, how do I protect myself against rogue tenants? Richard, do you want to start?
Well, this is a question that comes up a lot at landlord forums, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because a lot of the lobby, because there's between 9 and 11 million tenants, is in favour of tenants because that's where politicians want to win their votes. I don't know very much about the likes of tenants' history and those sorts of databases that have information on sort of rogue tenants that are repeat scammers, and certainly people like Landlord Action I know will be familiar with repeat scammers, etc. But I think the way you protect yourself from rogue tenants is to make sure you do proper referencing. You can use NLA tenant check. So credit check, previous employer, previous landlord. And whenever I do use agents actually sometimes to find me tenants, I always ask them to meet the tenants before I agree to go forward, because now I'm an experienced landlord, I get a good feel for whether I think those people are going to be suitable. I always ask the question, who's going to be living at the property? And if they look at me gone out and say, well, just us, then that's the perfect answer. But if they then say, well, my girlfriend might move in and, my mum's coming over from wherever and she might move in, then I know they might sublet. So, it's so important for you. I've realised it's the most important thing in my business now, making sure I'm really comfortable with my tenants. Okay. So that's the way to avoid the bad tenants.
I'll give everybody a little go on this.
Yeah.
David, anything from...
So, the interesting one actually on this is the Section 21 abolition. Now, at the moment, there is no official database of bad tenants. There are lots of unofficial databases of bad tenants. However, would I get general agreement that the main reason people evict tenants is because they stop paying the rent, or cause other damage that requires you to put your hand in your pocket to fix? Now, using a Section 21, it's a no-fault possession, therefore there is no court record. If you abolish Section 21 and have to go down the Section 8 route, you're probably all going to put in money claims along with the eviction claim, at which point, assuming the money claim is approved and goes through the court as well as the eviction, that then starts creating county court judgments against bad tenants. And I can see if they do abolish Section 21, landlords will start using, obviously, will be using Section 28, will be putting in money claims, tenants will be getting county court judgments, at which point the official register and judgments will become the best bad tenant database in the country.
And is that, so GDPR, does it get over that? Does that become freely available?
GDPR exempt.
Okay,
I mean, this is a problem at the moment. One of the things that's been helpful to some extent about the Section 21 consultation is the ability of landlords to push back around this issue of poor tenant quality. Currently, if you take a money claim against a tenant for rent arrears and evict them for rent arrears, it doesn't go on the county court judgments database at all. Whereas if you take a debt claim against them, it does, which is a completely bizarre scenario. So one of the things that we're pressing for is a change to that structure. Court waiting times are currently ridiculous. The Ministry of Justice is crowing about having got it to 17 weeks, down 1 week. And yet bailiff times have gone up twice by a week in the last 2 quarters running. So, and they're now suggesting in the Section 21 consultation it will go down by a week. So up 2, down 1, not really an improvement for my mind. What the ARLA is pushing for is 10 weeks, end to end in court. That's actually what the court rules say. So I think the government should be aiming for 10 weeks, which is what the court rules say they have to achieve.
But we're talking about how do they prevent getting a rogue tenant?
And then the other thing that the other 2 things that we're pressing on is actually making universal credit work properly. So at the moment, if you're a social landlord and a tenant who's on universal credit disappears, you can still continue to take their rent arrears out of their universal credit, which you can't do as a private sector landlord. That needs to change. And the government has considered that
How do they legally get away with that? Can you legally treat different...
Well, yes, they can.
Obviously
Basically, they can.
But I don't get that.
But because universal credit is a loan to the tenant, it's not a payment to a landlord. I mean, social security is generally speaking is a payment to an individual to disperse, but it's not paid to landlords in a true sense. It's paid on the tenant's behalf. So there's movement there, and the last thing, of course, which is being done by a number of people in different contexts, is trying to get credit records in general.
That is a good thing.
To actually reflect rent, and that's good for tenants because, of course, at the moment, if I pay my rent on time every month, it doesn't show up my credit record at all. Whereas if I pay my mortgage on time every month, it does, which is extremely unfair to good tenants. But equally, it means that credit records aren't actually very useful in respect of bad tenants because all their non-payment history doesn't show up at all.
But the challenge there is getting the data from us, from myriad 2 million landlords across the country. I mean, Experian, I think, are the ones that have set up the credit files now. And you'll see if you look at your Experian's credit file, there is a space there now for rental payments. So, if your landlord is recording your rental payments on that system, then they will show up. But it's just getting that rolled out.
And some money was made available for tenant referencing.
Agreements with Experian and other people to try and allow landlord data to get across, even from smaller landlords.
Quickly, Tony, because I want to move on.
Sure. And the simplest way of all, if they're moving from another landlord, ask who the landlord was, pick up the phone and talk to them. That will tell you an awful lot. Well, clearly,
Which does happen.
Does happen.
Where else have we got? Let me just all put your hands up so I know where you are, and we'll try and fit everybody in. Yeah, we'll go to you first, sir.
My question is, do you know when your tenant is gone? When they leave, if there are either arrears or subsequent damage or any reason why you might want to address, I've had tenants leave a whole lot of personal possessions, everything. I don't even know when they've gone. I've been perceived by the council, I can't pay the council tax, for a tenant which no authority that I can't provide an address for. So do you have any suggestion on how I can find out when my ex-tenants now are?
Okay, straightforward answers then.
It's difficult. One, if you're being pursued by councils for council tax, you're not liable for it, so you need to fight back with the council.
And have you done that successfully? Have they?
Yeah, they do eventually back off. Councils basically see landlords as an easy way to top up their coffers too often.
Utilities will do the same as
And
well.
utilities
Sometimes
are
I've had
really bad about
utilities
this.
chasing me for money, and I know I'm not liable, and they've been very heavy-handed about
But
it.
And didn't
Ofgem
some-
are very good about dealing with those complaints.
But didn't something come in on utilities that said? Was it Wales? Oh,
Well,
was it
it's water, but only in Wales, so it doesn't
Oh, okay.
apply in England.
Water in Wales, not
Water in Wales, they can chase landlords for tenants, but only in Wales. The other thing is there are plenty of tracing agencies out there. I tend to say landlords that debts are valid for 6 years, and I suggest you leave it for 12 to 18 months, and there are quite a lot of tracing agencies who offer no-win, no-fee tracing. And the more information you have, the better. I always say that there are two great pieces of referencing. The best piece of referencing information you'll ever get is someone's bank statement.
Yeah.
Know what their bank details are, if for no other reason that you can then issue a claim against them at their last known address, which was the property address, get a judgment, and then go and do an attachment. Go and do a third-party debt order and freeze their bank account and take the money out. And you don't need to know where they are for that.
And getting an NI number as well.
NI number and also an employer's reference, knowing where someone works, pay slip and a bank statement.
This is all about referencing. This is why referencing at the start is so vital.
Yeah, and why using referencing companies is part of a picture, but it's not. So many people just think, oh, I can use some 30 quid referencing company, it'll solve all my problems. It's not as simple as that. They are useful, but they're not the answer.
Yeah, okay. And then, gentlemen, that was helpful. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we're seeing an ever-increasing number of large build-to-rent schemes being built in the major cities, especially in London. I'd just like to ask the panel what you think the impact is likely to be over the medium term, should we say?
Of the build to rent. Does everybody understand what build to rent is, or do you want me to give a quick?
Institutional investment.
Yeah. So thank you.
Sorry. Couldn't help.
Equally long words.
So basically, it's big companies like Legal and General, and rather than just letting out a couple of properties here and there, they're building 200 properties, apartment block, and they're setting those up, and they're building them for long-term rental, and then they will rent all of those out, and it's a kind of pension fund. Interestingly, abroad, like we hear how marvellous Germany and all these other places are, that's because they kept their institutional investment. And that's what a lot of landlords do over there, whereas we lost it all in the late 60s, and we then ended up with a very tiny private rented sector, but now it's kind of back. So it's very much a pension-backed fund investment. So that's what build to rent is. So Richard, do you want to start with build to rent?
Yes, I mean, I would say certainly in London, and this is a market I know best, we do see quite a lot of blocks going up, but they are just a drop in the ocean in terms of the overall size of the PRS. So it's not like, say, if someone tells you that student accommodation has become saturated in Leicester, that's not what's happening with build to rent in London.
I think it is about 15,000 a year they're expecting. Isn't it? Which is units, which is tiny. But for you as a landlord, what's important is that to the bottom of your road.
Yes, I was going to say London
not necessarily
is about micro markets, and if your market is Elephant and Castle, and you've just seen all of the build to rent blocks go up there, then I would be concerned. But I think in a way build to rent is quite good because it may cause us to have to up our game, because obviously the standard of them is quite high. They do tend to go for the top end of the market, don't they? And certainly I think we've seen with HMOs, they're more kind of hotel-esque, and they've got ensuite bathrooms and so on. And I think all of that is partly because build to rent is starting to improve things.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also disagree with you. Personally, I think the build to rent sector is going to have a very negligible impact on the actual private rented sector. We have all of the main build to rent landlords within our membership, but I think there is 120,000 built or planned at this point in time, which is
That's
a
across
drop
the country,
across the country, which is a drop in the ocean.
Out of about 4 million rented.
Less than 1 year of government building need projection.
Exactly. So we're talking a tiny percentage. It's very sensitive as well to regulatory change. So a lot of them that were looking in Scotland, when they got rid of Section 21 in Scotland, I did have a fascinating discussion with the Scottish member of the Scottish Parliament last year with They all seem to have dropped out. I don't know. I don't understand why they're still investing in England, but they've stopped investing in Scotland.
I think
Like,
it's too.
I'd like to draw your attention to the evidence session that I gave a couple of years ago.
I think there are literally only 2 schemes or something.
Yeah,
aren't there,
it's
in Scotland?
tiny.
Yeah.
But, as Richard said, they're only going for the highest end of the market.
Yeah.
One of the things I argued, or I had thrown at me during an evidence session by the Member of Parliament for Dulwich, was, well, the build to rent don't charge for tenant fees during the tenant fees ban discussions. No, but they charge about somewhere between 15 and 25% more in rent than an average property. So whilst I accept your point, even if they are at the end of your street, if you are a core market landlord, they are not encroaching on your
They
market.
tend to be
'cause they're gonna
very
so-
niche as well. It's
So
kind of
just-
young millennials,
Just to
etc.
give you an example of that, so TP is one that's in Wembley Park, and I was looking at their
Lovely.
rents yesterday, and
Massive.
I think 2-bed apartments were 2.5 grand.
Yeah.
And locally, you
And they
could-
were lovely, don't
yeah,
get me
they're
wrong.
fantastic. And I think it was a 3-bed for 3.5. But so, and you'd normally be looking at 1,200 to kind of 1,500. But I think as a result of that, what they will do is they will raise expectations and the standards of what tenants look for. And that I do
At the
think
high
will
end.
be, that will, well, I don't know. I think it will raise it overall.
But I would make
you'd
one
still go and
final
have a look
point.
at them, even if you couldn't afford one.
We're actually supportive of build to rent because they are servicing a market
Yes,
need.
absolutely.
And there aren't enough houses. It's not diminishing the demand for your property.
Agreed.
There are demand vastly outstrips supply. And the only time that build to rent is ever going to have any impact on the private rented sector is if supply outstrips demand. And you mentioned
Well, that,
Germany.
yeah.
But Germany, which is
shells,
the height of the the wonders of the institutional investor and build to rent sector, it still only accounts for 40% of private rented properties in Germany.
So nowhere in Europe does it outstrip 40-odd% of the sector, and in here it doesn't even make 10%.
It's 1.
Yeah, so it's 1%, and they're adding relatively small numbers. And the other thing I would say is one, it's very specific. It's basically here and the Olympic Park. And the other point as well, of course, is Kirsty and Phil are right. Location.
Yeah.
Most build to rent stuff is at the moment locationally pretty rubbish, and they're hoping that the location will be a location in 10 years' time.
There's something else you can add to that. It's quality. The one thing the build-to-rent sector has got is very high standards, hence why they're going for more upmarket.
And we are talking swimming pools and gyms when I was looking at this.
Amenity
absolutely.
services, isn't it, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also customer service.
It is customer service. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah,
Well, I've heard that,
Tony do his bit, and then we'll
Thank you.
open it up because
Most kind, Kate.
questions we can get
Right.
better.
So, if you want good quality tenants who don't screw you over, who look after the property, who want to have somewhere safe and good to live, even on a short-term basis, whether it's an HMO or an AST or whatever else, do the property up to the highest sustainable standard. People will look after it. They don't even realise that they're doing it, but they say, oh, it's got a decent quality appliance. It's harder to break, and they won't try and break it. So whatever sector you're in, from lodgings through the way, all the way through to high-end build-to-let, do it to the best standards, get good tenants, and you will not be affected to such a great degree by L&G upping its pension fund down the road, because it's different horses for different courses, and not everyone wants to live in that kind of block or your single house. There's room for it all.
Yeah. I think one of my hobby horses is EPC ratings. Whenever you are doing anything to a property, make sure that you get that EPC rating up as high as possible. Because remember, one of the actual hardest bills that tenants have to pay is not always the rent, it's the utility bills, which are likely to carry on going up. And the lower your the better your EPC rating, I'll get there, the lower their utility bills means, which means they have more in their back pocket to pay and afford your rent. So don't sort of, I know it's a little bit of legislation that came in, and I'm really disappointed that the government hasn't worked with the industry as we've asked them to really push what a fantastic win-win this bit of legislation could be for everybody. So get those EPC ratings up, because the lower your heating bills are, the more rent for you. You've had the question, sorry, so I'll go to the gentleman behind.
I wonder if you've got any thoughts on the kind of the macro situation in the markets.
Okay, so you're talking about the, as in macro as the property, or economics, or economics, yeah. Right. Tony?
Donuts. Donut economics. So you have to look at it in the round. Come what may, there are...
We need to be quick on this.
Okay,
got to
fine. Demand exceeds supply. We all need people to live, somewhere to live. We're not making any more land apart from Iceland and the Galapagos. So you can look at it micro, macro, whichever way you want to turn the instrument. People need good quality homes over their head. Brexit, left wing, right wing, somewhere in the middle. Keep going, you're doing a good job.
Okay, David?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, people get very excited about Brexit and so on, and undoubtedly there is some slowdown in the economy, but a lot of that will lead to pent-up demand. There are fewer properties available than people who want to live in them, and house prices, whatever people say, are not going to drop beyond a certain level. So I don't see that there's any reason. I mean, an investment today in property is a good investment today, is a good investment tomorrow. I don't see any difference.
Can you define a certain level?
Well, I don't think prices in London are going to drop. I think they might stabilise and sit static for a while, and there might be other places in the country that are doing better. I'd be surprised if London house prices went through the floor. It's certainly in very high value properties they are, but that's a totally different discussion.
And you have to bear in mind the North East is they actually still haven't recovered their house prices versus 12 years ago. So there are kind of three markets. There's the London, Cambridge, Oxford market that's kind of slowed now and kind of hit a bit of a peak and a buffer on affordability. And you've got places like West Midlands where they're growing, but they're not growing anything like the rate they used to. And then you've got places like the North East where actually they've really flatlined, had one set of years where they had price increases, and then they've never seen them since. So that's what we've seen. Also, David Smith did remind me that there is another David Smith who is an economist for the Times. Yes. And I have to say, as an economist that understands housing, he's one of the few that does. So that's somebody to follow. David and then Richard, any other thoughts?
Again, I haven't got a great deal to add over David. We have actually done a little bit of research on the impact of Brexit on property values. On the letting side, and we used capital economics actually to do it. On the letting side, it looked like effectively there would be stagnation, maybe a little bit of negative growth, which is actually what we are seeing in London and other parts of the country. But we have to factor in that the property market is a ripple. Generally, what happens in prime central London ripples out across the country over the following few years. Prime central London has unquestionably been hit hard. I was speaking to one agent. It was one of those, I really couldn't care less, when he went, I'm shocked. I rented my £65,000 a month property. It only went for £57,000 a month. I was like, get out. I just don't care. But for the rest of the market, it looked at stagnation, and what it said was probably in the 6 to 12 months after that, it will then go up. So we might have a bit of stagnation until we are out or not out, depending on what happens, and then up. Same with property prices. So there was a dropping, and what it said was about £2,500 drop in property values nationwide as a result of Brexit. London, about £7,500. But that was only for the kind of up to about 12 months after Brexit actually happens, at which point capital economics suggested that because the cost of building properties with both labour and materials will go up as a result of us leaving the EU, house prices will then start going up, and we will see quite a sharp recovery of house prices. So effectively, they said it's not going to have that much of an impact in the medium to long term, and as landlords, you are medium to long term investors.
These tend to be quite good reports. So can you remember the name of it?
Not off the top of my head.
So if you go to the ARLA website, put in the capital economics, but these are really good reports. So capital economics and the Centre for Economic Business Research, CEBR, those are the two best economic organisations I've watched from a forecast perspective. So these reports are really, really worth looking at, because they do give you a good guide. Richard,
Yes,
final word
it's
from you?
all crystal ball gazing, isn't it? But I've been planning on the basis that at the next peak in the cycle in London will be mid to late 20s. And I guess that's just thinking on a technical basis, looking at how often we have drops in house prices, etc. But that's the feeling that I have, having been in the market for 20 years myself. And just to add that I think changes to immigration post-Brexit, I think, could well affect the lettings market in London. I think they already have been over the last 2 or 3 years. We're certainly seeing changes in East London, where all of my properties are, just by, people are still coming from Romania and Bulgaria, but they're not coming from Poland or Central Europe, or indeed Spain and Italy and France anymore. And there was a report that's bore that out recently.
Okay. Great. Thank you. I hope this has been a good session. I hope you got something out of that, and thank you very, very much for filling it with your questions. Well done.
Thank you.